What is up, YouTube? Johnny here again today. We're going to be bringing you a new episode for the IS300 build. In this episode, we're going to go ahead and continue with the paint and prep of the body parts that we need to do a complete color change on. So we're going to go ahead and get started on that. So the first step is to I'm going to be using 600 grit sandpaper. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and water sand down everything. So go ahead and make sure I sand down every single little piece that's going to be painted, because you want the paint to stick to the part. You don't want it to eventually, with age, actually just peel off. So what this does, when you sand it down, it actually helps the paint stick to it. That way it doesn't come apart later on in the years. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright guys, now that we're done wet sanding all of the parts, we have, for example, the fenders, the hood, and the bumper. Now, the step that I'm going to take next, because we have to do body work and we have to do Bondo and glaze and have it all set up. Bondo and glaze are two compounds that actually have a lot of pores in them. So after you're done bondoing and you sand it back down, they have a lot of pores in them, so it'll show up when you paint. So what you have to do is go ahead and primer that. So we're gonna go ahead and primer all those parts that are Bondo glazed or where there's bare metal showing, because the paint won't stick very well to it. So we have to go ahead and primer that. So we're gonna go ahead and do that now. So the main goal of the primer is to cover up any imperfections. So where we sanded down, where we recreated the fender and the area where we put glaze and stuff like that, we need to go ahead and put enough primer so you can put on a thick coat that it covers all that. That way when you sand it down by hand, it gets a nice smooth finish and you don't see any of those weird cuts or weird angles that are made when you do the glaze and then you sand it down with an orbital sander. So this is the primer that I'm gonna be using. It's called Hypercure primer. So what this does is it actually dries a lot quicker than your average primer. You can go ahead and buy any type of primer you want. It just sometimes you have to primer it one day, like towards the afternoon, and then wait till the next day for it to dry. So with this Hypercure primer that I have here, you actually have to add something called the hardener. So it's a 4-to-1 mixture. So for every 4 of this, you add 1 of this, depending on how much you want to actually use. So the main goal of this is to actually cover all the imperfections, and then this one is actually going to dry really quickly, because once it dries, you can go ahead and start sanding and you don't have to wait till the next day. So that's the benefit of this one. If you guys want to take a look at it in here, already got it all mixed up. It's just a normal gray color. Most of the time that's what primer color is. So this is what I'm going to be doing for the parts that I had to repair. If you buy brand new parts from an auto parts place, most of the time they already come with a coat of primer, which is kind of like a black material. And what all you do is basically sand that down with 600 grit sandpaper, and then you can paint over it. You don't actually have to primer it like I'm doing here. That'll actually work just as well. This is specifically for parts where there is different compounds like glaze or Bondo, and where the metal is bare or it's showing. So in this case, like for example the hood, we don't have very many spots where there's actual bare metal, so we don't have to primer the whole hood. And in regards to, for example, the bumper, I'm not gonna be adding adhesion promoter like I did in the BRZ video, because that one was straight plastic, like there was nothing covering it, and this one already has paint on it. So since it already has paint on it, it already had, it's already promoted underneath that, so it's already gonna stick to it really well because of the paint that's on there. So we're just gonna sand that down and go ahead and paint it like normal. So let's go ahead and get started on the primer. Alright, so now that I finished priming, I actually had to wait 45 minutes to go ahead and let it dry. So now that it's dry, the next step is to actually go ahead and sand the primer now, so we can even out all the rough edges with the sandpaper. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so now we got all of the sanding done, which takes forever if I might add, to sand down all the parts where we actually put some primer on, and any parts where the primer oversprayed, you actually have to smooth that out also, because it gets a little bit fuzzy and that can actually show up in your paint. So you want to go ahead and sand it as much as possible to where you can smooth it all out. And now that we are at this step, it's time to start painting. Alright guys, we're finally done for today. Finished painting the fenders, finished painting the bumper and the hood. It's really dark outside. Good thing we have really good lighting inside of the paint booth. So now it's time to go. But before we go, I'm going to show you guys the finished product. That way you guys can see how it ended up. So here's the finished product.